You have already started. When it comes to tobacco, you both of you are very excited. Good evening and good morning in Geneva. It's our pleasure to have my good friend Lukasz to be with us, and it's also our pleasure and honor to invite Shi Juren, Shi Jinshui, who has been in Geneva Taiwanese delegation in Geneva for quite a long time, and I have been known Shi Juren for since it's something like 60 years ago. I was in FCTC conference meeting in Geneva. Yeah. And also we have a very fundamental anti-tobacconist scholar, public health scholar from Law Institute at Chen Feng. And I would give mic to Shi Juren. He would chair this session and he would introduce the speaker. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your kind invitation. Professor Lukasz Gruszczynski, okay, and Professor Wu Chunfeng, and distinguished participants, both on-site and online. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and good morning. Welcome to join this special lecture on the WHO pandemic agreement. Thank you for the invitation of the organizer. My name is Jinshui Xu. I'm the director of the Office of International Cooperation, Ministry of Health and Welfare. Before taking this position, yes, I worked in Geneva for quite a few years and follow the pandemic issues, including the pandemic agreement. So, as you know, there are currently two ongoing negotiations on the IHR amendment and on developing a new pandemic agreement, respectively. So, in hope to better respond to future pandemic. Just in recent, these two groups jointly coordinated for better harmonization and coherence. So, in recognize of the catastrophic value of the international community in showing solidarity and equity in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the World Health Assembly convened a second special session in December 2021, where it established an intergovernmental negotiation body called IMB, open to all member states and associate members, and the regional economic integration organization as appropriate to draft and negotiate a WHO convention agreement or other international instrument on pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response, with a view to its adoption under Article 19 or under other provision of the WHO Constitution, as may be deemed appropriate by the IMB. So the IMB established a process and a systematic approach for its work and agreed at its second meeting that the instrument should be legally binding and contain both legally binding as well as non-legally binding elements. So the developing of pandemic agreement is our main topic for today, and its negotiation text were released in October 2023 and discussed in IMB 7, which was held from November 6 to 10 and will resume on December 4 to 6 next month. So I'm honored to introduce the speaker of today, Professor Lukasz. May I just call you Lukasz? It's easier. Lukasz has a very impressive CV. He has the degree of Doctor of Laws from the European University Institute Law Department in Florence, Italy. And he has a Master of Laws in International Business Law, LLM, with merit from Central European University Law Department in Budapest, Hungary. And he has a Master of Arts in Law with merit from the Jagiellonian University Department of Law and Administration in Krakow, Poland, his home country. Right. And Lukasz is currently associate professor and the head of the Department of International and European Union Law, Kozminski University in Warsaw, Poland, specialized in the area of international economic law, international risk regulation, and he is also a research fellow of the Institute for Legal Studies, Hungarian Academic of Science Center for Social Science in Budapest, Hungary, specialized in the area of international economic law. And Lukasz is also a visiting lecturer at the AUCA LLM program, Law Department, American University of Central Asia in Kyrgyzstan. Besides, Lukasz has been working in the University of Cambridge, UK, University of Michigan Law School, USA, University of Zurich, Switzerland. He also served as advisor or expert to the Polish Ministry of Education and Science, Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Law Company. And he has qualification as an attorney at law at the Warsaw Bar Association since 2016. And he is the arbitrator for bilateral dispute under the EU trade agreements with third countries, the indicative list of European Commission since 2022. And Lukasz also is expert in the TBT and SPS. So eventually he was in Geneva last week and attend the SPS committee. And Lukasz has a very long and very impressive CV. He earned many awards in recognition of his outstanding scientific research and achievements. He is also a member of editorial boards of many peer-reviewed journals. So Lukasz will deliver a speech entitled The WHO Pandemic Preparedness Treaty, the current state of play. And now let me introduce the discussion after the Lukasz presentation. I'm thrilled to introduce the discussion, Professor Wu Quanfeng. He is an associate researcher and director of Center of the Law Information of the its name is very difficult. Institute Jurisprudential Academic Clinic. Professor Wu is a adjunct professor at the National Taiwan University, where he teaches the health law and the regulations. And he has a degree of JSD from the UC Berkeley, LLM degree from the Harvard Law School, and Master of Science from Yangming University, and LLB and BS joint program in public health from the National Taiwan University. And he is an expert in the health and medical related laws, human rights laws, and the public health aspects. He will make intervention right after Professor Lukasz' speech. So without further ado, let's welcome Professor Lukasz to deliver his speech. Professor Lukasz, you have the floor, and let's give him a big hand.
So I would like to start by thanking for inviting me here, and for you, the chairman, and for you, Professor Wu, to act as a discussant. And it's always a privilege to be in Taiwan and to talk about my research. So thank you very much. So I'm going to discuss today the new pandemic treaty that is currently under the negotiation. And my idea is to show why there was a decision to conclude such agreement, why it was not enough to base future strategy against the pandemics on the basis of existing instruments. And then I would like to move and to talk a little bit about what is the content of the proposed treaty and why it's going to be treaty, why it's not just the revision of the international health regulations. I will tell also something about the timeline. So where we are right now and what we can expect in the near future. I would like to conclude my speech with the challenges. So to indicate those issues that remains problematic. And in this context, I would like to pay special attention to a new phenomenon, so something that rarely exists in the context of negotiation of international agreements. So different conspiracy theories that seems to be quite popular in Europe and United States, and I would be very much curious to what extent this is a phenomenon that is limited to the West, to Europe and to United States, or perhaps this is something that also exists in here in Taiwan or more generally in Asia. So let me start by summarizing and saying a couple of reasons why we started to negotiate the new agreement. And I think COVID-19 pandemic was a real wake-up call. It came as a surprise, despite of the fact that that World Health Organization already for some time was warning that we should expect a pandemic of this scale. Despite of this, I think the world was not really prepared. And if you look at the consequences of the pandemic, I mean, the most obvious one is are consequences related to public health. So we know that there are almost 7 million people that died because of the pandemic. The real number is most probably much higher. Depending on the estimates, it could be anything between 15 to 30 millions. And of course, this difference between confirmed numbers of deaths and the real number of deaths is connected with difficulties in detecting the cases and qualifying as connected with COVID-19. But of course, the health dimension was not the only consequence of the pandemic. The world economy also suffered a great loss. And again, depending on the estimates, it could be anything between 12 to 14 trillion, sorry, of losses to global GDP, according to IMF, until 2025. So I mean, obviously, those two reasons would be sufficient to rethink the strategy of how we deal with the pandemics. But the pandemic also show the importance of global cooperation. That you can only address in a meaningful way a pandemic only if you cooperate. It's not really possible to do it at the national level. You need to cooperate with the others. The pandemic also highlighted the fragility of the health systems. I mean, both at the international and domestic level. I mean, we all remember the pictures from the hospitals that were overcrowded by the patients, by inability of the doctors to get the equipment, and inability of the states to get the equipment, and at the later stage also to get the vaccines. And then the last thing, and I think this is something that is central to a new treaty. The pandemic also show that the world is unequal. So it was much easier for advanced rich countries to get the access to different pandemic-related materials, also to develop vaccines and medicines. And of course, they also dominated the distribution when those things were available. So yes, this was also one of the things that that turned out to be a sad reality during the COVID-19 pandemic. Sorry. The need for the new instruments came as a conclusion. There were different bodies that were established to investigate the response to the pandemic, and at least two of them, so independent panel for pandemic preparedness and response, as well as the Global Preparedness Monitor Board. They came to the conclusion that yes, we need a new pandemic accord because there are important loopholes in the international health regulations. And the second element that that was important in this context was that the trust between the countries was lost, and both panels came to the conclusion that to rebuild such trust, we should rather aim at the new treaty rather than just a revision of international health regulations. And of course, as I said before, a central element in this context should be equitable treatment between the nations, so more equity between rich and or developed and developing countries. This message of the board and the panel was reinforced in March 2021 by political declarations that was signed by 25 heads of the state and governments. Boris Johnson, who was the Prime Minister of UK at that time, was the leader of this initiative, but the initiative was also joined by Director General of the WHO and also by the President of the European Council. And the declaration also called, showing that there is a political willingness, called for the adoption of the treaty. As it was already said by the chairman of this meeting, negotiation over the new pandemic treaty, new pandemic accords, it's only a part of the story, because there is a second part of the story. So at the same time, WHO also undertaken the review of the international health regulations, and there is a special working group which is expected to propose the amendments to international health regulations around May 2024. So more or less the same. I mean, not more or less. It will be at the same time when the final draft of the pandemic treaty will be proposed. And here there is an I took a short information from the document of the WHO showing why it's necessary to change international health regulations. So they want to have targeted amendments that will simply improve the warning system, early warning system, that will improve the communication between the parties to regulations, and that will also clarify the role of the Director General, for example, in the context of declaring public health emergency of international concern. So here is the short chart with the dates. And again, as was said, May 2021, this is the moment that the World Health Assembly decided to explore the possibility of the new treaty, and the conclusion was, yes, we need December 2021 establishment of international negotiation body that is responsible for the preparation of the draft. And this also meant a formal launch of the process. And since then, we have 7 meetings of international negotiating body. The last one is currently ongoing. So we had the first part of the meeting at the beginning of November, and this will be resumed at the beginning of December. The idea, and I will come back to this, the idea is to have a final draft by May 2024, which is 5-6 months from now, and we will see whether this is feasible. And of course, once you have the final draft, the second idea is that it will be adopted in the form of international treaty in June 2024. And afterwards, since this is international treaty, it needs to go through the ratification process in the member states. So this is just the information, but I think it's important to show what countries are discussing right now. So this is the 7th meeting of the international negotiation body. And as you see, the negotiation still relates to most, if not all, the provisions. So it doesn't seem that there is a consensus over the content of the provision, and it's visible if you compare the latest draft that was made available with the one from June 2023. There are a lot of changes, and there is still a lot of disagreement between the members. And all those meetings are happening right now, and they will continue until the second part of the session that, as I said, will happen at the beginning of December. So this is the latest version that we have. It was published just before the beginning of the 7th session, so end of October 2023, very fresh. So what is it about? The Article 2 states the objective of the pandemic treaty, and let me read this part. The objective of WHO pandemic agreement, guided by equity, the right to health, and the principles and approaches set forth herein, is to prevent, prepare, and respond to the pandemics with the aim of comprehensively and effectively addressing systemic gaps and challenges that exist in these areas at national, regional, and international level. And if you look at the content, I think you can identify 4 pillars of the pandemic treaty or pandemic accord, and I'm going to use both names interchangeably. So first of all, the pandemic accord aims at enhancing public health systems within the country by making them strong or stronger, more resilient, and able to react in a proper way during the pandemic. It also aims at strengthening research and development capacities within the countries. And while this issue is not such problematic, it's not problematic in case of developed countries. Of course, the situation looks completely different when it comes to developing countries. So I suppose developing countries are the major addressee here for this pillar. The third pillar is a more equitable treatment of the countries, so more equitable access to essential tools. And when I'm saying essential tools, I'm not saying only equipment, but also vaccines, diagnostics, and so on. I mean, the thing that we saw during the COVID-19 pandemic, that they were not really available to a great group of developing countries, and that all the channels of the distributions were dominated by developed countries. And of course, the last thing, it's also, since this is international agreement, so it's not only about the improvement within the countries, but it's also about a better global cooperation and coordination. And again, as I said, you cannot really deal with the pandemics at the national level. You need to do it at the international level. And of course, if this needs to be done in an effective way, you need to have a good cooperation and coordination of activities. What are the key provisions? And of course, they relate to the pillars that I mentioned. So I'm not going to discuss them in details, but there is a lot about transparency. Countries are expected to collect data, share data, pass the data rather than keeping for themselves. A separate set of provisions relates to risk assessment and preparedness. So countries are expected to conduct regular risk assessment and assess the capacity of the system, of the health system, in terms of preparedness for the pandemic. There are a lot of provisions about international cooperations between the countries, either within the COP or within WHO. Access in equitable way to essential countermeasures such as vaccines, medicines, and personal protective equipment. There are also provisions that leads to enhancing the role of the WHO as a facilitator and as a coordinator and as an entity that provides technical expertise. Again, there are also provisions that relates to innovation and research, and as well as building capacity of public health systems. And this is, again, this is interesting, especially if you look in the context of conspiracy theories that I will be talking in the moment. There are also obligations with respect to health literacy and risk communication. The idea is that the general public needs to get a better information and more reliable information about the pandemic threats and possible responses. There are no provisions, so I put it because this is something very important, and this is one of the issues that is highly contested among the members. So there was a lot of expectation about the accountability and compliance. This is something that was watered down in the current version of the agreement, and we'll see whether it will be formulated in a different way in the subsequent drafts, or perhaps this is something that will be decided by the conference of the parties later. But there is a question about the accountability of the countries and compliance, and also about the ways in which you can check the compliance of the members with different obligations that are included in the pandemic accord. So what are the existing challenges? If you look at the above at different drafts of the treaty, if you look at what the countries voice in media and what is the response of different NGOs that observe the negotiations, I think there are 5 points that, if you want to generalize, that are contested. So the first one is how to set a balance between sovereignty of the states and global cooperation. So to what extent pass certain decisions to international level, to what extent to leave states with certain decisions. And of course, it's also a question about the resource allocation. So to what extent move the money from national to international level and make WHO or some special fund responsible for the distribution, or to what extent leave those decisions at the national level. Then the second thing, and this is what I already mentioned, there is a big question about the compliance and accountability. The current version provides, and again, as I said, it was watered down. The current version provides that this is something that will be decided afterwards, after conclusion of the treaty, by the conference of the parties. There is a possibility of creating a special committee that will check the compliance. But right now, the compliance is mostly done by members in the form of self-reporting that is submitted to WHO, so not very demanding, I would say, approach. Then the next question is about funding. So who is going to pay for all those things? I mean, if you look at different obligations about strengthening of national health system, about conducting risk assessment, about training of medical personnel, about guaranteeing the access to the different pandemic-related materials, it's very expensive. Yeah. It's also clear for everyone that developed countries should be the ones that will mostly pay for this. But the question is to what extent they should pay. So what should be the level of the payment? Again, it seems that this is something that will be decided later on by the conference of the parties. At least this is my impression when I'm reading the latest draft of the treaty. The next issue is addressing equity, and here there are two issues actually. So I mean, one of them is protection of IP rights. This is something what developed countries insist on. They don't really want to have a general waiver for IP rights, or they argue that this is something that should be addressed not so much in the context of the pandemic treaty, but in the context of WTO and TRIPS agreement. On the other hand, developing countries insist here on a general waiver of IP rights, and in exchange for this, they're proposing that they are willing to accept provisions about the genome sharing and biological materials sharing with the developed countries, arguing at the same time, if they are providing those materials, I mean, if there is an outcome, because you do research on the basis of such materials, this outcome in the form of treatment or in the form of medicine or in the form of vaccine should be available to developing countries. There seems to be no agreement between the members as for now. And then the last issue is a fight with disinformation, and this is something that I will come back in the moment. So, I mean, if you look at all those elements, I think you can make a certain generalization. But the big question is how. So, I mean, one question is what kind of content you would like to see in the agreement. But the second question, and I think it's more important, is how strong those provisions should be. So we can put basically everything in the treaty, but depending how, in what kind of strong language or weak language we'll formulate it, the consequences will be completely different. So if you need to take the best efforts to do something, it's something completely different from a very hard obligation, which is subject to compliance and accountability mechanism. So I think at the end of the day, it's really about how the agreement should be formulated. So moving to my last issue, so the conspiracy theory. I mean, it turns out that that this issue is so serious that it was addressed by WHO, by the Director General, I mean, really, at least in Europe and United States, and again, this is my impression. It's the discourse is a popular discourse is really dominated by those fake news. So I mean, just if you look here, so pandemic treaty is connected with the WHO can send military forces to execute, for example, obligatory vaccination, or I mean, it sounds absurd, but this is the arguments that you can hear. So some more photos from internet, WHO vaccination unit, and of course the big pharma is behind all of this. So if you want to somehow summarize all those theories that, as I said, provoke the response from WHO, they also provoke the response from other institutions, and we have a specific provision in the context of the pandemic treaty that tries to deal with this issue. And again, if we look into the COVID-19 pandemic, this was a very popular, at least in Europe, it was a very popular narrative. And you see the same arguments here in the context of the pandemic. So the most common narrative here is that this is a power grab by WHO and UN, and the idea is to create a one world government, which, by the way, I don't think would be such a bad idea. But you know, what the elites, at least, I mean, according to this narrative, what the elites wants to do is to move the power from the level of the states to international level, and of course, according to the proponents of this theory, this is undemocratic. And here is the quote: WHO proposed pandemic treaty is simply one puzzle in the larger puzzle where there will be there will be a control of agriculture, food, energy, and other things as globalists try to cement control on critical industries. And especially in this context, One Health provision is indicated as a basis of this approach. And can I show two movies, short movies? So both of those guys, they're members of the parliament. I think it's so perhaps not the Farage, but.
When I say pandemic, you're likely to scroll past. Everyone is tired of COVID, rightfully so. But please take a moment to keep watching. A new global pandemic treaty is in the works. The intention is for countries to respond in the same way during a future pandemic, more so than during the COVID-19 pandemic. There are 3 reasons why we should not desire this. Reason 1, who will manage the pandemic treaty? It is the World Organization, abbreviated as WHO. That may sound like a neutral government agency, but it is not. The WHO is heavily influenced by countries like China, as well as by the pharmaceutical industry. These are global players with tremendous geopolitical and financial interests. And who pays the piper calls the tune. Those interests don't always align with the interests of your country and its people. Now, the WHO wants to gain more authority through the pandemic treaty, while various other interests take precedence at the WHO. This is not good for our countries. Reason 2, the WHO is not democratically elected. Those who make decisions cannot be held accountable. This is a very bad idea. In a democracy, policymakers should be democratically elected and be held accountable accordingly. If we now commit ourselves to this new pandemic treaty, power will be further removed from the citizens. This is detrimental to national sovereignty and democracy. Reason 3. The best approach during a pandemic is not the same everywhere. Consider culture, for example, but also consider population density or how the balance between risk and freedom is preserved. It's not the same everywhere, therefore we should not implement the same policies everywhere. In summary, the new global pandemic treaty gives way too much power to the WHO. Firstly, it primarily serves the interests of countries like China and pharmaceutical giants. Secondly, we are giving away power to an organization that cannot be democratically controlled. Thirdly, the best approach to a pandemic is not the same everywhere. So we should really not support this pandemic treaty. If you share my concern, send an email with this video to the politicians in your country. And if you find this video informative, then please share it.
Okay, and the second one, this is Farage that, became famous in the context of Brexit. And since UK is outside of European Union, he found a new enemy.
For many months now, the internet's been full of people talking about the pandemic treaty planned by the World Health Organization. You know the people that covered up the fact that actually the pandemic was caused in China. They tried all the way through to write it off as having passed from animals in the wet market. Of course, they are just about the most pro-Chinese Communist Party organization in the whole world, which is why Donald Trump, when he was president, got America out of the WHO. They're now proposing a pandemic treaty. That would absolutely commit us to spending lots of money preparing for the next pandemic and give them the power to order lockdowns, tell us what vaccines we could use. It is literally a globalist treaty that takes away the power of the nation state to do stuff. And look, Given we've learned lockdowns didn't work, that actually Florida and Sweden got it right, I never want us to be anywhere near that again. Now, one or two people are waking up to this, and well done, the Daily Telegraph, for putting this on the front page. Of course, the government have responded by saying, we are in favour of the pandemic treaty, but we would not allow it to overrule us. We'll have our own health policy. This is exactly the same promise that was made when we joined the EEC. It's just a little trading club. Don't let it worry your little head. I think the time has come, it's going to be very close anyway, where we say to our MPs, say no to the WHO pandemic treaty. We don't want to sign on any account, and frankly, we shouldn't be paying any money to this appalling organisation.
So yeah, I mean, this is the typical narrative that you get in this context. So other arguments, which is connected with, of course, with the power grab, is introduction of global tyranny. The pandemic will give the WHO the power to mandate vaccines. Of course, if you look at the text of the agreement, you cannot really find anything like that. And one of the first articles of the pandemic treaty highlights the a principle of sovereignty of the members, and that those decisions stay with the members. Or pandemic treaty allows WHO to track and monitor people movements. I mean, really, you see those kind of arguments. Again, and this is the argument that was already used in the context of COVID-19 pandemic. So that the pandemic treaty is also a part of the larger plan to reduce the world population. And in this context, for example, it's highlighted that one of the biggest donors of the WHO is Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And of course, Bill Gates is seen as a main promoter of the idea that we need to reduce, because of climate change, we need to reduce the world population. So this is simply yet another piece of the puzzle. And of course, the last thing that was already mentioned is that the pandemic accord is simply a way for pharmaceutical industry to profit from the future pandemics in the context of building the capacity of the. It doesn't matter that pharmaceutical industries are pressing developed countries to actually, for example, to prohibit or to fight against any kind of waiver which is proposed by developing countries. So if we want to conclude this presentation, I think that if you look at the current text, despite of the fact that it was watered down and it's below the expectations that we had at the beginning, I think it still represents the critical opportunity for the world to strengthen the global health security. Of course, the final outcome depends whether it will be a success or not, whether it will have a transformative nature, depends on the formulation, and this is still unknown. We are still in the process of the negotiation. The second observation is that while if you talk with the negotiators or if you read what they present publicly, I mean, the negotiators seems to be optimistic. And they say that it's still possible to conclude and to have a final draft in May. I doubt that this is possible. It's only 5 months, and it seems to me that many things remain undecided. I mean, one possible way how you can get the success is simply to include many decisions, for example, about financing, about the equitable treatment, about other controversial things, and leave it for the decision of the conference of the parties. So there will be a general provision in the agreement with the information that the details should be decided by the conference of the parties. I'm not sure whether this is a good strategy. I mean, one of the things that facilitated start of the negotiation at the beginning of this pandemic treaty talks was a momentum, and if we simply move, difficult things for the decision of the conference of the parties, we might lose the momentum, and the obligations might be even more weakened. So the most controversial issue, this is what I already said, and we also need to realize, and again, this is something new, especially if you look at the negotiation of other agreements, is that we somehow need to learn how to deal with all those conspiracy theories, and how we need to deal with those people that oppose those kind of agreements, and without really, you know, closing the channels of the communication, without closing the discussion, but at the same time be effective in addressing concerns that are raised by those groups of the society. So that's all on my side. Thank you very much for the attention, and looking for the discussion.
Thank you, Lukasz, for your overview, and you identify the challenges and the controversial issues. Now, let's welcome the Professor Wu to deliver his comment or suggestions or feedback, reflection to you, to Lukasz' presentation.
Hi, thank you, Director Xu. And I'm very glad to have this opportunity to discuss with the pandemic treaty here. And it is a very difficult task because the pandemic treaty is kind of complicated. And I don't have the access to the indoor negotiation or whatsoever. So I can only present my own observations. It depends on what the public documents have shown online. So I will base on that and talk about some of my opinions of my observation about this pandemic treaty. And as Lukasz just mentioned, there are lots of different drafts have been drafted in the past year. The WHO CFPAS, including the conceptual zero draft, bureau's text, and negotiating text. And here I will not only talk about the WHO CFPAS, I will also talk about the IHR, the proposed amendments. I will try to see what might happen and what's the difference between these two treaties. And the first thing I want to mention is the payroll process. There are now actually ongoing payroll process to revise the IHR and to negotiate a new pandemic treaty. But the problem is that the overlapping obligations found in each other draft could lead to the fragmentation or to conflict. For example, there are proposals in both instruments to create payroll governance bodies and mechanisms. And the creation of new governance bodies in each instrument may lead to further proliferation or mechanism for monitoring and fostering compliance and worsen already strained capacities across member states. And another example is that the One Health approach. I have tried to study that for a while. And the One Health approach is regarded as an important component of the CA+, but the One Health approach is rarely mentioned in the proposed IHR amendment. It is therefore unclear what is the role of the One Health in the whole pandemic preparation and the prevention framework, and how to incorporate the CA+ One Health approach into the implementation of the IHR measures. So the content, I must agree that the contents of two treaties may be referred by member states for mutual reference during the negotiation process. However, from my perspective, it is still not clear whether the negotiating body of each instrument, they try to meet and agree with each other on which provision should go where. Therefore, the fragmentation problem then may persist in the future implementation. Therefore, the interaction between the two instruments in terms of their respective scope of application must be clarified. But I must say that because both of the proposals are still not the final, so there might be be no exchange of opinions or ideas because they are not finalized. But in the future, I think the interaction between these two instruments need to be clarified. And the second thing is the progress. The problem is that I think the reform being negotiated have become progressively weakened as memory of the pandemic phase. Because during the negotiation, we can find out that the governments are balking at the ideas of robust state and binding commitments and resisting the framework of the strong norms. And one of the reasons might be, Lukasz just mentioned, some of the disinformation they try to talk about against this kind of pandemic treaty. But the other thing I find out, the example is the One Health example. Because that we can find the importance of One Health example in One Health approach in the CA Plus is kind of decreased. I try to count the terms of the One Health, health and animal environment, or environment, or the animal, or the tripartite, and we can find out that the mention types of this kind of important One Health conception has been decreased. And in the negotiating text, the quadripartite is one of the very important platform for the One Health, is even deleted in the negotiating text. So I'm not sure if during the negotiation, what we have expected the pandemic treaty should do is actually decreased, and some of the important issues have been overlooked. And the third issue I want to talk about is about the benefit sharing. And it's related to a conflict between the global south and the global north. Lukasz just mentioned that the intellectual property is one of the issues. And the challenge of ensuring the equitable access to medical countermeasures is addressed in the proposal, because equality is kind of the big issues during the pandemic. And we can find out in the CA, either in the CA Plus or in the IHR amendments, the comprehensive rules on this point, the equal accessibility. They are trying to deal with various aspects, such as the issue I just mentioned, the intellectual property, or the sharing of information, or sharing of the patient samples and the genetic sequence. And intellectual property is no doubt the main hot issues here, because the developed countries would not agree to waive their intellectual property. And it is more complicated when the WTO TRIPS issues is getting involved. But I don't think the intellectual property is the only issue here. Regarding the information collection and the sharing, I think there are still some problems here, because the proposal, either the CA Plus or the IHR amendments, they still rely mainly on the member-based and the sovereignty-based model. In other words, the WHO are required to collect the information from and make the information received available to state parties, including non-parties such as Taiwan and other relevant stakeholders such as NGOs. However, early detection of pandemic and appropriate planning of pandemic prevention require comprehensive and extensive information gathering from and sharing with all relevant stakeholders. So the problem here is that if we try to share or that benefit sharing, should we just consider it a conflict between the global south and the north? How about some non-party states, or some of the relevant stakeholders, like the non-state actors? And the problem is that similar ignorance of ensuring effective and meaningful participation by all stakeholders, rather than state parties only, are repeatedly found in the drafting process. So there's some kind of ignorance of the inclusion of all stakeholders in the CA Plus or the IHR amendments. And the other thing related to the conflicts between the global south and the global north is a very controversial issue, the common but differentiated responsibility. Because in the Article 4.8 of the CA Plus 0 draft, there actually are proposed to have the CBDR here, and argue that states that hold more resources should bear a commensurate degree of differential responsibility. But then in the Bureau's text, because it's a very controversial issue and the developed countries are not totally agree with that. So in the Bureau's text, some countries propose to delete this idea totally from the Bureau, from the negotiating text. Even in some options, these ideas actually kept in the text, but the context are actually kind of limited. And in the recent negotiating text, we can find out the CBDR. This kind of concept is actually deleted from the general principles. So I think the issue here is that should we establish a common but differentiated responsibility and to guarantee that the developing country need to help the developing country or this developing country. But the other issue I think is very hard to discuss here is that how can we decide the countries with the more capacity and the resources relevant to pandemic? The problem is that unlike because this idea is from the climate change laws, international climate change law. But the problem is that developing countries, they may hold more capacity in some fields, such as developing vaccines. But some developing countries may hold more capacity in other fields, such as manufacturing facial masks. So I can agree that the countries with more capacity and resources relevant to pandemics should bear more responsibilities. But could we use the traditional distinction of the developed countries and the developing country here in the common but differentiated responsibility? I don't have the answer, but I just mentioned there might be some questions or some problems here. And the fifth issue I want to mention is about the expanding public health emergency situations. In the proposal, the DG is given the authority to declare an intermediate public health alert where the public health event does not meet the criteria of FAC, but require heightened international awareness and preparedness activities. And the DG and one of the WHO 6 regional directors can declare a FERC. So the expansion of the situations that they try to have the assessment of the risk earlier, in the earlier stage. And I think it's kind of a good direction. But the expansion of the public health emergency situations also show the attempt to give the WHO and its DG more powers, including legislative and executive power during the public health emergency. Taking Article 12.2 as an example, we can find out in the declaration of the FAC. Actually, here, this sentence is actually deleted. The state parties are in agreement regarding the DG's determination. And following the Article 12.3, if the DG and the state parties whose territory the event arises do not come to a consensus, then they will go to the Article 49 process. This is actually deleted. So the DG has more powers to decide whether he should go to the process of declaring the FAC. And I basically agree with this one. But the problem is that when we give the DG or the WHO more powers, could we ignore the state center or member center decision-making model? Because when the rules and the mechanism are still disproportionately tied to the DG's exercise of power, rendering insufficient member access to and participation in core decision-making and the greater tendency of regulatory capture, the expansion of the WHO's or DG's powers then may cause the ignorance of the member-driven governance model as well as civil society inclusiveness and the public reason. Even though in the proposal, there are some articles try to include the member states or the civil society in the discussion. But I think how to balance the powers of the WTO or the DGs and the member state, their ideas or their values, I think it's still an important issue and try to, I think the proposal need to balance these two different models. And the other thing I want to talk about is accountability. Lukasz also mentioned about the accountability. And one is that the state parties' compliance with obligations is essential in the proposal. And the compliance committee or the implementation committee is adopted in the HR proposal. But I think it is the right direction. But the problem is that the ignorance of the member-driven governance model, as I just mentioned, in the WHO's decision-making process, could it cause problems for the state parties? Because some scholars has mentioned that the duty, for example, like the duty in regard to the state parties' core capabilities are taken into consideration in the IHR amendments. However, these required duties could potentially reshape domestic health systems and promote shifts in domestic health resources allocations. And this may conflict with health priority democratic society have set for themselves in implementing the right to health within their local content, reflecting locally specific disease burdens. So I don't say that the state's accountability should not take into consideration, or I'm not saying that the WHO's power should be limited to the list. I'm just saying that how to balance these kind of two different ideas should be considered in the proposal. And the other thing is that, how about the WHO's, the DG's accountability? The question of how to ensure accountability of the WHO is DG for their decisions is not actually well addressed in the proposed amendments. Given that the amendments aim to further increase the emergency power of the WHO and its DG, further thought should be given to of how to ensure their full accountability. And I think there are some report systems try to be are adopted in the proposal. But is that enough? That's the question I try to figure out. And the next issue I want to talk about is human rights, because there's still a general lack of engagement with the implication that many of the proposed amendments may have on human rights. And the rights-based public health practice and the human rights principle for developing restrictive measures in pandemic responses are still overlooked in the proposal. Taking the CA Plus as an example, in the zero draft, we can find the Article 4.1, 4.2, 4.13, and Article 12.1 all talk about the human rights. Even some of the civil rights are mentioned in Article 12.1, and they have an entire Article 14 on the protection of the human rights. But in the negotiating text, we can find out that these kind of articles are all deleted, and they only leave the respect of human rights and this one, the workplace, the protection of human rights. But the human rights terms are actually deleted from here. So I'm not sure if the CA Plus want to incorporate human rights in their proposal, but I can see the development here is that the ignorance of human rights might be in the process. And the next thing I want to add is that Lukasz just mentioned about that some of the controversial issue may be left to the conference of parties to discuss. And actually, I can find out that in the Article 5 of the CA Plus about the One Health, they actually try to leave some issues into the conference of parties. I think it's a good proposal and it's a good kind of the good strategy. But if my question is that if we want to leave these kind of controversial issues to conference parties, taking the FCC as an example, should there be any guiding principle or strong commitment, or this issue might be ignored in the future conference of parties? So I'm not sure if we want to leave it to the conference of parties. Should there be more kind of different arrangement in these articles? Yeah, that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Wu, for sharing your observation. And I think you also identify some more issues we can further discuss. And before open the floor for QA, I wonder if Lukasz have some feedback to the observation and sharing by Professor Wu just now. Yeah.
I mean, probably out of because I mean there were a lot of things in the in your presentation, in what you said, and it will be difficult to address everything. But I mean, from my point of view, two things are probably most important. So I'm asking myself exactly the same question: to what extent we should agree on certain things right now as a part of the treaty, and to what extent we should let the conference of the parties. And of course, I'm also looking at the FCTC. FCTC, it seems to me that it's a rather successful story. So it was possible to develop the guidelines that really go into the and despite of the fact that if you look at the text of the convention, it's really framework, yeah. So the conference of the parties was able to feed the content of very general provisions with specific instructions. I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether this would be possible here. So I mean, I would love to. You know, believing that if you leave the decisions to the experts, they will be able to get some kind of consensus. I think that the issue of the pandemic and all the things that comes with the pandemic, regulatory issues, are very much more politicized than cigarettes and tobacco control. Where it seems that I mean, it seems to me that there is a consensus among the politicians, and I'm not sure whether it will be possible to repeat the success of the FCTC. Having said this, I also see a danger. So this is what you said, that we started at the beginning of the negotiation with very ambitious goals, objectives, and with the time, as the memory of the pandemic faded, we came up with the provisions that do not really reflect the expectations at the beginning of the negotiations. So, I mean, if the same dynamic will persist, the chances that we'll have something ambitious on the basis of the COP decisions is even smaller than right now. So perhaps, I mean, even taking into account the risk that we might not deliver, maybe this is the time to press for certain things at the level of the convention, not just to, you know, kick the can down the road to the conference of the parties. But again, it's, you know, it's just my thought, so I don't know, and I intuitively think that we should deal with certain things right now rather than to move them. And the second thing I was, and I understand that this is something that is crucial in the context of Taiwan that is not participating, that you would like to see an inclusion of different stakeholders. I mean, not limit to the states. And I was wondering how to, and I don't have an answer. It's more a question. Is how to deal with this in a negotiation which are already difficult from the political point of view, by insisting to include human rights as one of the guiding principles, by insisting on inclusion of, and again, which is, you know, from political point of view, this is a bump, yeah. And by inclusion of different stakeholders, including Taiwan, for example. I mean, without mentioning even Taiwan, yeah, you've got another bump, and so I don't have an answer how to deal with those issues if the level of difficulty is already high. So that's two reactions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your reaction to the Professor Wu. Yeah. I think that to me, because I work for the Ministry of Health and Welfare, to me, the most important issue is how Taiwan can participate in this new pandemic agreement, and also in the amended IHR. So that's also my big concern. So in recently, regarding the stakeholders, we will work on this with our colleague in the Geneva office. We hope that at least we can have some voice of Taiwan being heard during the negotiation. And to me, I think I will raise another issue is if the Taiwan really is not, unfortunately, won't be included in the pandemic, will that cause any problem? I think there will cause some problem. How big is the problem? I think it's also rely on some creative solution discussed between Taiwan government and the WHO. That maybe involve some countries, big countries, so we can come out something. And in the Article 12, it said the WHO pathogen access and benefit sharing system, WPBAS system. This kind of system is about the pathogen sharing and providing the pathogen and also the benefit sharing. I think this kind of system is some kind of replicate from the current influenza system. In the influenza, they have people framework. So the people framework, the flu vaccine manufacturers, they assess the flu virus and they develop the flu vaccine. So they signed a smart agreement with WHO. So stating if there is some influenza pandemic happen, they will donate such as 10% of vaccine or drug that develop, and another 10% at affordable price sell to WHO. The kind of the system already exists for, I think, more than 10 years. But until now, the system just there. It's never been used in real world. So I think, and that it's quite a successful system. And in the system, some of Taiwanese manufacturers, they participate in the system because they pay the contributions because they use the virus, so they pay the contribution. So I hope in the coming months, if this article is well passed, we hope similar arrangement can be arranged for Taiwan. So I hope the countries and the private sector in Taiwan can also work with government to make this happen, to make sure we are in the system. And some of my thoughts. I think now I will open the floor for questions. I wonder if participants on site or online will have questions, can raise your hand now. So let me check it with the people with me on site here. Any questions? Yes, please.
We learn quite a lot from your excellent presentation. And I am very interested to learn more about what's the EU role in the WHO new treaty negotiations, particularly for you mentioned about the most controversial issues, such as how to balance the national sovereignty with the international cooperations. What's the EU role in this issue? Thank you. This is my first question. And my second question, what happens if countries of this new treaty fail to comply the treaty? Are there any punishment measures contained in these treaties? Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
So, Lukasz, you want to respond to these two questions first, or the ladies? So we will collect questions for you to respond.
Hi, my name is Juliet Balkian, and I'm from the National Taiwan University Masters of Global Health program. I want to talk a little bit or ask a little bit more about health literacy and the general public, because as public health professionals, we are privileged enough to anticipate that another pandemic is going to happen, right? But when it comes to the general public, is there a way to keep them informed and possibly have them prepare mentally themselves without fear mongering? And a way to do this regardless of government. And because I'm from the United States, and I feel like with the upcoming election, Trump is looking like he's going to win again. And that kind of makes me a little bit nervous. Not that the next pandemic is going to come within the next 4 years, but just keeping that in mind. Thank you.
Okay. I see no questions from online participants. So Lukasz, please.
So addressing two first questions, I'm not sure that I understood, but perhaps I would try. And if I'm wrong, please correct me. I mean, when it comes to the EU position on the pandemic treaty, I think it's a strange mix of typical interests that you will have for developed countries, and this is visible when it comes, for example, to IP protection, and so EU is not very different from other developed countries. But I would say, I mean, this issue, the European Commission as or European Union as an international organization, well, is generally in favor of different international arrangements. So you can expect that it will come with the sympathy to, new treaty, new kind of coordination between the countries. Having said this, it's a health issue, and there is a European dimension, but this is something that in principle falls within the scope of the competences of the member states. So I suppose the voice of the member states will be is much louder in the context of this negotiation, individual member states rather than the voice of the Commission. So the EU is this strange creature, yeah, that depending on the competence, it's either the European Commission or these are members. So I suppose it's members are here more important. When it comes to the punishment, no, there's no punishment. Yeah, this is the big question: how to make the countries accountable, how to guarantee the compliance, and of course, you can introduce sticks and carrots. So you can, for example, you can make access to money and to financial resources conditional upon the compliance. So yes, this is a possibility. You can introduce some kind of blaming and shaming that the countries needs to present the report about the compliance and then needs to face the reaction of other members. Or perhaps you can introduce some kind of compliance mechanism at the level of the conference of the parties, or some kind of special committee that will issue, and again, blame and shame. But I would say it's very rare, and there are very few international organizations which really have any kind of punishment. At the end of the day, we are talking about sovereign states, so you don't punish them. And I wouldn't expect, I don't expect anything tough here. But yeah, let's see. As far as the third question, I don't really have an answer. I suppose this is a good question for I don't know, risk communicators, how you can communicate with the general public, and how you can pass a certain message, and it's a part of broader problem that and it's not only about the pandemic treaty, it's about different things. It's about overflow of information with little capacity on the side of the general public to distinguish fake news from real news, and everything is politicized. You don't have a discussion. I don't know. I mean, what I remember, for some time I was working on the question of risk communication. So how you can pass certain information, and I lost the track of new developments in this area. But what I remember is that I mean, the problem of confirmation bias, the problem. I mean, different problems that are connected with the risk communication leads many experts to believe that the chances of changing the ideas of the person is extremely difficult. Yeah, and so I have doubts that you can persuade many people that believe that this is a big conspiracy by global elites and WHO, that in fact it's really about the protection of public health. So probably you should not really target those groups, but you should probably target general population that do not have an opinion, whether it's something good or bad, and perhaps the job there will be a bit easier. And yeah, and I hope that Donald Trump will not be a president.
Thank you, Lukasz. So, any further question? Yes, please.
We know the EU is a contract party to the 2005 WHO Framework Tobacco Convention. So my question is, can the EU become a contract party to the new health treaty? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I mean, when it comes to tobacco control, I mean, we saw it with the adoption of the Tobacco Products Directive, that they presented this not as a problem of public health, but as a problem of internal market. And I suppose you could also try, but it will be more difficult, especially if you look at the pandemic treaty. You could try to say that those different provisions, they also relate to internal market, because there might be connected with the movement of the people, with the border measures, and so on. But yeah, I think I don't have enough information to come up with the firm answer. I think it's much easier in the context of FCTC. It will be more difficult when it comes to pandemic treaty.
Yeah, regarding this question, 有问题吗？线上有问题，没问题。OK， Professor Wu.
I have a follow-up question related to your response. Yeah, I know that I totally agree with you that including the non-party state will be a difficult issue or difficult process, and it is it's a political issues to including, for example, like Taiwan in the pandemic treaty. But my question is that, because it depends on the public health perspectives, some issues in the pandemic treaty are actually neutral, like the information collection and the sharing. So if like the information collection and the sharing are limited to state parties, there might be some kind of the holes or the gaps. So, and I remember that in the IHR amendments, in some issues, they try to argue that the information or the decision-making process or rationale should be public accessible in like the WHO's website, something like that. So is that possible in some kind of the neutral provisions, include more stakeholders in the provision? Is that possible, or is still a very political issue?
I suppose it's I suppose that much depends on how those neutral aspects are seen by other countries and especially by China. And I mean, my expectation would be, I mean, if you want to have a success of the negotiation, and unfortunately, this is the weight that will be given to the voice of China in the context of negotiation, whether they see something as political relating to Taiwan or not really relating, or will be the most important factor. So perhaps the best strategy, but both of you mentioned this, is to simply try to use the loopholes that exist. For example, by participating in the mechanism and private parties, private companies, and so something that perhaps nobody thought that might be used as a because I'm afraid that once something is framed in terms of Taiwanese participation, it will immediately be met with the opposition of China. Yeah? But yeah, I mean, I suppose, I mean, you're much better expert than me when it comes how to use, different doors to cooperate, for example, with WHO or with the bigger partners, so they can present certain things as a Taiwanese proposal. I mean, the ideal scenario would be, so I mean, somehow when it comes to Taiwan, the WTO is a good example, but it was, different time without China as a member and so on. So it was possible to frame that, yeah, you can be a member if you're a separate custom territory. And of course, from the pragmatic point of view, it should be the same. I mean, it's the pandemics do not know the borders. They do not know they don't care about political tensions between the countries and so on, so on. So from this point of view, if you can have a transfer of information and the materials and so on, you should include as many stakeholders as possible. But yes, there is a separate political reality.
Thank you. And I see the Professor Chai online. She has some comment. So I would like to invite Professor Chai. Are you still with us? Jen Chai.
Clear at all. And that's the reason why I type in there.
So will you take the floor to share your observation or comment?
Okay, is that okay? Is the sound clear to you?
Sure. Please, we can hear you.
Okay, so generally speaking, for one of the comments here is that FCDC and IHO pandemic accord, from my viewpoint, it's totally different stuff, because one is focused on chronic disease, which is focused on the domestic policy, especially from the perspective of providing guidance regarding how to make domestic policies in each country. So more is more for experience sharing. But the IHR or pandemic accord is really a treaty that requires a real collaboration, which means that there will be definitely some resources allocation or some political power involving in. However, like all you already mentioned, emerging disease, virus knows no borders. Everybody knows that. So from the very beginning, maybe the information sharing will be still the main target rather than the following measures that requires a lot of resources allocation. discussions. And I have to echo with Dr. Shi that there are already some existed framework, like a PIP framework, which is already discussed, but the issue has never been used before. So actually, in the very beginning, for the negotiation of pandemic accord, I think it's quite ambitious, and maybe it's too ambitious to deal with everything that is ever discussed ever. So I wonder maybe if there's a possibility to focus back again regarding can we use the advanced technology to focus on the information sharing perspective of the treaties. And also possibly to emphasize the authorizations of announcement of the information regarding the possible pandemic, not directly, but rather information potential to explore. But of course, I have to insist that 10 years before the study conducted by me and the other scholars in USA found out that the reporting timelines, actually those kind of reporting capacity or the willingness is highly related to the transparency of the country. So this still be a huge burden for these issues. However, technology is advancing. So I wonder, is there any focus or more possibility of covering to early detection rather than further treatment?
Thank you, Professor Tsai. And Lukasz, you have something to respond? You to respond to Professor Tsai just mentioned about the nature of the FCTC and the IHR pandemic is different, and also the technology.
No. I mean, I fully agree that these are two different things, FCTC and. But I mean, in both of the cases, we're talking about the framework agreement, and we have a similar system of the conference of the parties that is expected to decide on certain issues. So and I'm not talking about the international health regulations. It's more about the pandemic accord. So I would say that yes, they're different, but there are also similarities between them. And I mean, one thing that you mentioned is that perhaps we were too ambitious. I mean, my impression was that at least when the negotiations started, we wanted to be transformative. I mean, if you look at different obligations like One Health or strengthening the health capacity of the members, it's really of transformative nature. You really want to go down to the level of the states, and you want to change the system. And I mean, the question is whether this was too ambitious. Perhaps, but I mean, are we able to prepare and to prevent and to respond in a way that we wanted to respond to the pandemic without those changes? So is it really enough to address only the issue of the information transfer and information exchange without really addressing the issue of research and development, strength of the health system at the national level? And of course, connected issue of financing. I don't know.
Oh, Dr. Wu.
Hi, Lukasz. Thank you all. I was intrigued by the speech of the first congressman from Strasbourg, right? I think so. I think actually I quite largely I agree with what he said actually. But the point is, it is his argument has become, or such argument has been already been put forward maybe 30 years ago when NAFTA was signed, when WTO was established. and I think this is the same argument. Sovereignty is eroded, and we are controlled by non-democratic elected person in somewhere in Brussels, in Geneva, in New York, somewhere, and they are more or less they are in line with pharmaceutical company, and this is something like NAFTA and WTO. So my question is, from your perspective, what is new? I mean, if the enemy for the congressman is the same as WTO or NAFTA 30 years ago, or is this a pandemic treaty? It bring new enemy for them, or is the same argument or the same target?
I mean, my impression is that it's just the history repeating. It's you know, the enemy come under different names, and but I mean, as far as I remember, WHO was already an enemy in the past. Definitely, it was a Codex Alimentarius. I remember when I was working on the SPS agreement, and I was reading about the Codex Alimentarius. It was also supposed to be a global government under the technical name of Codex Alimentarius Commission. So I mean, you know, from this point of view, it's nothing new. And I agree with you that this is a more sophisticated type of, I would say, conspiracy theory, because it combines the elements which are true. I mean, I think we can legitimately ask about the accountability of the WTO. We can ask about the accountability of the, as you mentioned, of Director General of WHO. We can talk about the possibility of civil society of having some kind of impact. So you know, the best lie is when you combine real concerns with real elements with exaggerations. And I think this is a technique which is used quite frequently in those theories. So you pick up something which is true, and then try to combine with those elements that are not really true. But it's not very different from what we saw in the past. In different contexts, not only at the international level, but also at the national level. So there is a constant fight between the elite and regular people, and the elite, the globalists, want to govern everyone, and they come under different names.
Oh, okay, please.
You mentioned about conspiracy theories in your presentation many times. And we know the new pandemic treaties also maybe include one clause related to how to deal with disinformation. So how to define disinformation? And you mentioned about, you know, the examples of the conspiracy theories can be identified or defined as, you know, disinformation. Thank you.
I mean, it's very difficult to deal. So I remember that, you know, this was also a problem during the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, and for example, social platforms. They introduced the system in which they will contextualize the information. So you will have, for example, a post on Twitter, on Facebook, and then you will have a disclaimer saying that you know, the statement in this should be contextualized, and you should look at the scientific evidence, and so on and so on. But for example, Twitter decided to remove this, so they don't really control the quality of the information anymore. Elon Musk thinks that freedom of speech is more important than the quality of the speech, and see this kind of, you know, contextualization as a kind of censorship. of the information. What I see, but it more comes. It doesn't necessarily come from the government. It comes from other outlets that operate on the market. So Deutsche Welle, for example, they have a special series of videos and information in which they try to respond. So it's fact checker. Yeah. I think CNN also does this. So different traditional media outlets, they try to somehow. I mean, the television in Poland is doing exactly the same. So they've got a separate series of the articles programs in which they're trying to respond to different claims and simply check the facts of the. If you somehow. And I've got the impression that if you somehow involve the government, either by asking the government to regulate the sphere or perhaps to respond directly, I mean, yes, this is done to some extent. I mean, there was even a statement on the side of WHO saying that WHO is not seeking a power grab. It's not the new government, that the world government, and so on, so on. But my impression is that the impact is very limited. So it will be considered as, yes, another proof that the government is trying to manipulate with the information. So I don't know how to overcome this paradox. That at the same, on one hand, the government should react, but on the other hand, any reaction, any intervention of the government will be simply considered as yet another proof that the government is behind the manipulation. So my impression is that we are still seeking the answer to those kind of questions.
Actually, Russia has proposed some articles in HR amendments to require the state parties to control or to regulate disinformation. But I have reviewed the articles. It's kind of the scope of the disinformation is quite broad. And for example, it try to argue that the state party need to regulate unreliable information. But for the emerging pandemic, in the beginning of the emergent pandemic, there is no reliable information because all information need to be confirmed, and there are some information that need to be shared or distributed, so people can discuss how to regulate the kind of thing. So, what's your opinion about those kind of articles put in the pandemic treaty regarding the disinformation regulation obligations imposed to the state parties?
What I can say is that whenever it comes to any proposal from Russia, I'm very suspicious. I don't know to what extent this was, and this is perhaps not direct answer to your question, but a side note. I don't know to what extent this was covered here, but there was a number of journalistic investigations. And they were asking who is behind those accounts and those people that propagated certain conspiracy theory during the pandemic. So not so much during the negotiation of the pandemic accord, but during COVID-19. That it's a form of population control and so on and so on. And surprisingly, that many accounts that were directed at Western Europe and United States, you could trace the Russian connection. And the strange thing was that when the war started in Ukraine, and of course, the pandemic stopped to be a number one topic, and everybody moved to the topic of Ukraine. The very same accounts also changed the narrative, presenting a narrative that was very much in favor of Russia and so on, so on. So I'm simply, I mean, if anything comes from Russia as a proposal, I'm always asking myself whether there is a second button in that proposal, because I mean, from the point of view of Russia, I mean, creating some kind of tensions within the Western societies is already, I mean, it's objective, and it's, if you're able to do this, it's it's a win situation, because you divide people, you you undermine the credibility of the government. You and yes.
So I think no more questions. And also no more question online. So I will close the seminar for today. And thank you, Lukasz, for your very session. And we have very good discussion. And also thank you, Professor Wu,